let's open it up to questions. Any questions for any of the panel members? This is not a good sign, no questions? Okay, then, yeah.
Just a question regarding the process.
There's the Village of Wellington Equestrian Preserve Committee. Is this somehow going to fit in with their role on preparing the master plan for, equestrian master plan for Wellington and their involvement in the comprehensive plan? Or have things been coordinated with them, or will they be in the future? Or is this more of a regional type of approach?
Did you direct that specifically to anybody? Because I can tell you what the, okay. Well, no, this is more of a regional educational workshop. The process was that you can't make decisions as a municipality of the tiny little Wellington when the bigger whole is not being addressed and the information has not been shared on what the resources and the agencies are. So this is simply a first step to look at what are our resources at the county. We did have state people that wanted to come that were unable to. We have university resources. We have a tremendous amount of resources to help us right here in our little village that we're not utilizing yet. So this is a first step. It's not governed by any particular person or not the Village of Wellington, not the Equestrian Preserve, not the EPC. This is a grassroots educational workshop. Anyone else?
Yeah, this question is directed to probably either John, Anna, or George. In your experience for equine development, how much did economics, in other words, money coming in to the community, how much of that was a driver as opposed to heritage and preserving the equestrian nature of the community? How much of it was spurned by economics?
I think the way that it worked for us was that for many, the primary motivation may have been heritage and personal passion for the lifestyle and for the animal. But from that was an understanding that to be effective, we had to make the case that this made good economic sense, the best economic sense for the community. And so it wasn't which one are we going to decide. Internally, everybody comes to their own conclusion about motivation, but that clearly, if you're going to succeed in a macro sense, and especially when we're dealing with a pluralistic society and communities that have all kinds of interest, economic interest and life interest and everything else, that if you can't make that economic case, then it's going to be a difficult road.
If I can add to that, in our little community, economics were not the driver, but they were the shield. And by that I mean we were not fortunate enough to just go out and make our declaration that we are an equestrian community. Just saying it doesn't make it so. And there were people, residents, who rightly were concerned about branding a township as an equestrian community. They said, well, what about tennis? And what about soccer? And, you got mostly the parents of young people with other pursuits. And when we did our job, and that's why I say it's a responsibility of government to spearhead the fact that the economic benefits would not detract but would add to the coffers of the other interests in the town, that we became successful. So if that answers your question.
Thank you.
And I would just add to that, looking across the 36 examples that we have of successful land use planning for communities, I think both John and George's points are key. Economics matter, the impact matters in the sense that it provides the explanation for the why. We are struggling within our industry, in the horse industry, with the perception that it is an elite sport. And that can be a turnoff when you're talking to a broader community of people who live around horses but don't get to enjoy them. And explaining the economics is an important part of overcoming that scenario where you're dealing with that perception coming into play. Interestingly, though, when it got down to the narrative of how things happen and why, the economy and the economics of it might have been the spark that got things rolling, but the decision-making, the thinking, and the vision almost always came back to the heritage, the culture, the feeling about being in the equestrian community.
Yes, this is addressed to Mr. Nicholson. I'd like if you could discuss a little bit on the interaction of your governments as far as attracting WEG. Here we had state level officials who were very interested, county level officials, including tourism people, but we weren't able to motivate the local government, the Wellington Council. Did you have, when you were able to put together a bid, can you just describe sort of the interaction amongst those levels of government?
But similarly, it was the Commonwealth of Kentucky that took an extraordinary participation in the bid, mainly in guaranteeing the initial payments to the FEI, and the governor and other leaders within that administration were very active in traveling and in making the case, and also in supporting within the legislature those capital improvements that needed to be made. So in that sense, it was the same process. It was a Commonwealth of Kentucky, because the Kentucky Horse Park is an agency of the Commonwealth. The city of Lexington kind of had a parallel course, that they weren't in the sense the owner of the bid, but they participated in a big way, both, as I said, at a discussion level within the community of how we make this into something more than a 16-day big event, and also how to maximize the city's appeal, during the games themselves, which also had the net effect of the renaissance of downtown. But I was inevitably, communities aren't homogeneous, but the leadership, the opinion leaders within the community understood the implications. So we had, I think, good buy-in that way. There was still AM radio, talk radio, that talked about, now how am I going to get to the grocery store with 500,000 people in our community? There's always that. But the vast majority, especially of the opinion leaders, were very supportive.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Hi, Mike Nelson, Palm Beach Polo and Palm Beach Polo West. It's no secret to anybody here that Palm Beach Polo is back in the polo business. We've got a polo league now, and we're seriously looking at taking some of our golf course properties and creating equestrian properties out of it. Some of the people have been to our formerly known as Greenview Co., which is now Polo West, and we have 3 polo fields we put there, and we have an outside arena. I guess the question is, for the young lady that gave the great presentation, of your 31 communities, how many of those 31 communities became successful because of the competitive industry, or was it the recreational aspect of the industry?
That's a tough question to discern. We don't necessarily have the data broken down well, but I can tell you kind of anecdotally an answer to that question. And I guess it's kind of the difference between having a ham sandwich every day and having a steak dinner for 3 months. And I'm sorry, I use really bad analogies. I'll try and explain what I mean by that. So what you see community to community in the places where we do have economic data to track it, is that your recreational horse user is your bread and butter in terms of consistently being able to count on the revenues. The people who keep their horses and are using them and they may be competing as well, but they're your more casual users. They tend to be bread and butter, but it also tends to be kind of at a lower level. What we found in the informal survey we did in Fairfax County, when you jump into the competitive world, your expenditure per horse goes up so significantly that you see a spike, that's my steak dinner as opposed to the ham sandwich, in the spending. The challenge with that is in a lot of competitive, in a lot of disciplines, the competition concentration moves throughout the year. So you're dealing with limited infusions of, they're not going, it's not a monthly thing, it's a 3 months here, then you're going to have 9 months with kind of the bread and butter level, and then you'll go back to your 3 months of steak dinners. So it's a different pattern to plan for, both in terms of what it means to the community and seasonal employment, and how it looks on expenditure. But one thing I will say is communities that house, as Marin County is an example of this, that house some larger scale barns that are competitive barns that may leave the area to compete, are still experiencing a relatively consistent level of that higher expenditure per horse, which is roughly around $33,000. Now that doesn't all stay in Marin County, but the people who are providing the services that are being paid that money are coming in and out and buying their gas there and having lunch and stopping for a soda or whatever else they do there, and they're also paying, you know, for the ones that live there, are paying taxes on the income they're making from that. So there's a lot of knock-on benefit we haven't been able to measure directly from direct competition and the housing of competition horses, but there's definitely that pattern. I hope that's helpful. It's not as precise as I would like to be able to give you in terms of fact.
I guess my follow-up question would be, most of your communities that you are dealing with are northern communities, and their industry would be limited to the fair weather. And I guess this is for John, too, since I would consider Kentucky part of the South. How many major communities in the South have really been successful in converting themselves from a non-equestrian community or minor equestrian community to an equestrian community?
That's a tough one. It depends on how you define that. I mean, when you think of the success stories throughout the South, they have tended to be, they tended to have a strong history around the horse, like Aiken or Southern Pines or Tryon. They've tended to have a strong history of horse. The Georgia Horse Park is an interesting example of things that work. I would not call it a robust horse community, though, that is surrounding there, but it has definitely turned that region into a different kind of place in terms of horse community than it was. I can't really...
A couple of others. There's Northern California. There's probably Norco, California, which is one of the earliest equestrian communities, and actually was strictly recreational until about, I think it's 5 or 6 years ago. They actually built some competition facilities, but that's 40 years after the town was considered equestrian. I believe it's Cave Creek outside of Phoenix is another one. Stevensville outside of, I think it's Fort Worth in Texas. Tryon, Aiken, those are other classics. There are a couple of examples. Well, obviously there's some in Florida, you know, outside of Ocala. The whole town of Ocala, I think, is a good example. I'm trying to think. There are a couple in Colorado, and I can't off the top of my head come up with a name. But there's one outside of Denver that was built actually originally as a competition area, but now it's turned into a full-scale equestrian community. So they're scattered. It's interesting, there are a number of equestrian residential communities that have been more or less successful. Some of them have gone on to become large-scale communities. Others have given up their equestrian aspect and just become strictly residential.
I'll piggyback on Susan. I think Rancho Santa Fe, Southern California's, and Coto de Caza, particularly Rancho Santa Fe, is going through very much what Wellington's going through, a show park facility, the Del Mar Fairgrounds, 2 big show facilities, no planning, and number of large horse established facilities, and they're suddenly being told that they could be turned into an urban growth boundary because there is no horse planning there. So they're really listening with an ear to equine land conservation resource and trying to reach out to say, what do we do? So good question. Another question.
I was just curious of those communities which are state-owned, like the horse park in Kentucky, versus privately owned.
The question was, of the communities that you looked at, what percent were private-owned horse facilities versus public-owned state?
In most communities that we looked at, well, I want to separate it out. In most rural communities we looked at, we were dealing with primarily with privately owned land. In most urbanizing or urban areas, although none of them are truly urban like a city proper, but urbanized areas that we dealt with, we were dealing with a mix that was probably 50-50 on public and private lands. And when I say 50-50, it tended to be more private lands for stabling and more public lands for competition and for trail riding and that type of thing. Although in some places we are seeing, as in Marin County, we are seeing stabling move to public lands.
I was wondering, in the Wellington area, say a 10 or 12 mile radius, do we have any idea of how many listed properties there are that have equine population at some point during the year?
That may be for Isaac, if you're going outside of Wellington to look at, oh, it's just in Wellington? A 10-mile radius of Wellington, how many horse properties? Yeah, I think that public and private horse facilities. Yeah. Mike, did you want to address that? I think you've addressed that. On the number of polo fields and private versus public facilities in a 10-mile radius of Wellington.
Well, in Wellington itself, from the research that we've done, we have we've located about 580 farms here in Wellington. That equates to what we've projected that there's probably something in the neighborhood of about 2,500 to maybe 3,000 horses that are housed year-round. What we see from the farms and the number of stables and the stalls that we've been able to count, we see that number grows to probably something in the neighborhood of about 12,000 animals during peak season, or high season. Outside of Wellington, I think that what Marianne is talking about on a regional impact is what we see, what's going on in Loxahatchee Groves, the acreage and areas around us, is that stabling of animals and the commuting of animals into Wellington for competitions is growing very rapidly. Obviously, our lands and our abilities to support horses in our community is obviously limited by the land sizes that we have. And we have large landowners, but we also have the 5 and 10 acre farms, as well as the saddle trail areas, which are in the 2 and 3 acre areas. So I think what we're looking from a regional aspect of this is that we don't, at least I'm not sure we understand it. Maybe the county has a better handle on it, but I'm not clear that we have a good handle on how this industry has spread beyond our region, our city boundaries. We're now regionally, and we're regionally impacting this. If you listen to some of the conversations, we've got people as far as way of Stewart and Miami that are coming up and talking about how our industry is affecting them. So we are having a regional impact. But the number of animals that are here, I mean, you hear different numbers from the showgrounds and obviously polo, and I think it's fairly safe to say that we are probably in excess of 12,000 animals, but it's probably more in effect of how regionally do we want to impact that. And you're defining it as a 10-mile radius outside of it. It may be even larger than that.
Thank you, Isaac. Let me get you there.
Just to complement what he just said.
Your voice right there is better.
Just southeast of here in the Ag Reserve, which is just south of Wellington, you have one of the largest thoroughbred training facilities. It's about 2,000 horses that they have there. It is state-of-the-art facility associated with the Hallandale racetrack and casino. You have a lot of facilities also in the ag reserve, all new, large, and small. Now, 10-mile radius take us to the Atlantic Ocean, so it's a very large radius. But just within 5 miles, no, we have all these other facilities that had spread outward. So it's becoming, no, like the central, southern, western part of Wellington, of the county, is becoming an equestrian hub.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask, because it's getting close to break, but we are about 5 or 10 minutes behind. Does anyone on the panel have any other comments or questions for any of the panel members after you've heard everyone else's talk? Okay, good. Then what I'd love to do, because we had some new people join us, is maybe just kind of quickly go around and just maybe a word or two what your feeling is from listening to the panel. Did you learn anything? We're trying to get prepped up for this afternoon's breakout into the 2 groups, and we're going to discuss whether those groups make sense to people and if there's other groups we need to be breaking out into. Those were just sort of the natural breakouts that we need to address. But if we just go around, and if there's anything that you've learned, any summary, rather than us summarizing it, which we will be doing and giving back to you, I think we're all kind of curious, with all the people that have donated their time up here to talk, what's your feeling? What can you take away from this morning? Anything?
Wow, it's a lot of information, and it's going to take me a while to process it, but I'm definitely learning a lot, and I appreciate this. Thank you very much.
We have an awful long way to go.
I'm interested in the fact that there's a lot of economic impact in for Wellington, and I think also that the environmental impact is very crucial to what's going to be happening.
I'm impressed with the number of the stakeholders who need to be part of this process that are here today. And I have to say thank you on behalf of the LTR for a fantastic turnout.
It's an eye-opener that there's more to having horses than just feeding and caring for them.
I just enjoy listening to what the various agencies and organizations are doing.
Just to echo what George said, the conversation is valuable, and this is where it begins.
I have to admit, I think this is the most encouraging meeting that I have attended since I have had property here. And in all the years that I've been down here competing, I think this is a group that looks like we may actually be able to come up with some starting points.
First, I want to thank everybody for here. I've heard a bunch of names. I've not got to meet them before, so it's great actually putting faces and names together. I don't know if anybody reads Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote a book called The Tipping Point, and we are at the tipping point right now.
Well, first off, I just want to say thank you to the Village of Wellington and Mike for, I think, starting and initiating some of the planning parts of this, which I think is really important for us to move forward. And I agree. I think it needs to move more regionally so that we can gather more information so we can make some really good decisions in the future. So appreciate that.
Thank you for coming out. Like I said, I'm with Indian Trail Improvement District. We're the neighbors to your north, so we just have one small equestrian facility. We're not like Wellington when it comes to horses and equestrians, and from listening to everybody, it appears that Wellington really has their work cut out for them and a lot of decisions to be made. But for me, the breakout sessions, there's a lot of stuff in there for me, and I know that I can get that from Miss Joan Hutchinson and a few of other people up there. So again, thank you for coming out. Thank you for having us.
I want to thank everybody for their time, but I've really enjoyed kind of hearing the economic aspects of the equestrian communities and the importance of the development of equestrian master plans. Also, the use and maintenance of equestrian trails. We're in talks and development of those ourselves, so that's really important for me to hear, is how those have come about and been maintained.
The most important thing I heard this morning was a three-legged stool. Cooperation has to be between municipalities, the equestrian community, and the residents of the community. That would avoid the tipping scale and help us to move along significantly.
I'd like to thank the speakers so far that I've heard today. They've provided a lot of thoughtful information and impressed upon me the importance of the indigenous nature of equestrian activities in the fabric of our community, and the importance of what the gentleman just said about the three-legged stool, with us all working together to come up with a cohesive plan.
Hi, I think it's important to look at it regionally also, not only with the municipalities within Palm Beach County, but also dialogues with Martin and Broward County. The other thing is, I've been involved in trail development, and we always talk about economic and historic tourism and heads and beds and what it generates. Well, based on these discussions, it appears equestrians generate far more economic impact than eco or historic tourism. And I don't really think the general public knows that. I think getting media out there and getting an awareness of what it does for the citizens and for the tax base is really important for the average citizen.
I'd like to thank the panel. Again, I don't know how many times we can thank you, but whoever put you all together, I think is really great too. Anyway, the thing I learned was, I think George made the point that the municipal government has to make it very clear the vision they want, regardless of economics, etc. Government has to make it very clear what their vision is for this community. The public has to support that. Cooperation, all the other aspects, three-legged stool, they're all important. I don't see one element being overriding any of the others. Thank you.
I 100% agree with that. Thanks to the panel. I did learn a lot today. I think Anna and John were both very vital to this discussion, and I think going forward that the village should tap you for coming up with our master plan, because you've both done that many times over. I don't think this is just a regional issue. This has now become, though, a very local issue that's become very, very volatile in Wellington, and if we could all come together at the end of the day and do what's right for this community, it would be nice.
Gene mentioned heads on beds. Let me take about 15 seconds to give you some sports commission data. They track room nights for various venues. Here are the top 5. International Polo, 1,300 room nights. This is back in 2011. 4th is the Honda Classic, 5,500 room nights. Dressage, 4,700 room nights. The Roger Dean Major League Spring Training, 24,000. The Winter Equestrian Festival, 97,300. So that just shows you the relative impact of the equestrian venues and events.
Thank you, Dean. Do you folks have any comments? No? Okay. Well, then this is.
I have a comment.
All right, George.
Someone mentioned how nice it was that the panel was put together, and I think there was a guiding light here, and I think we all owe Marianne Simmons a round of applause.
Well, thank you, but as you know, you can't do this alone, and this is what's making this the pivotal point, is all of you in your thinking was probably going, is this the equestrian preservation, or is it the forum? And since I've had both sides tell me that I was on the other side, I think we did a very good job coming to neutrality. So with that, we're going to break for lunch. Whole Foods has given us a delightful lunch. We can go outside and eat. I hope you continue to network. We're going to resume at 1 o'clock, and we're going to then brainstorm the questions we need to be asking, the issues that we want to capture, and then focusing down into the focus groups, breakout groups, and seeing if we have the issues identified enough. And if there's other issues, we'll capture them. We might not get to them today because we do have two critical ones with the emergency and the trails and the economic, but we can start, and we hope this will not be the only meeting. That the Equine Land Conservation Resource has indicated they are a resource. They're going to continue to support us. If we can figure out as a community how to get organized and how to work together, by golly, we've got some great support to help guide us. So, thank you. This is truly what we call a grassroots community effort. Since we had no budget for this and had to go out and beg food from Whole Foods and ask people to bring coffee, ask people to pay their own airfares to come out here. The only, and I didn't say this earlier, but I mean, if anybody feels at the end of the day that this was of value, we certainly would love any sort of small financial contribution that could go to even Equine Land Conservation Resource, because they're having to pick up the tab for the video, which we will make available to everybody, will be public, and all the documents and everything else. So all of us volunteered our time. I don't get paid for this. I volunteered my time and also bought food, and we all bought food. So it was really, truly chipped in. So if there's anyone that feels like they would like to have coffee this afternoon and wants to make a coffee run, we're right down to the wire on the coffee. Someone just say, hey, somebody go get coffee and give us $15, we'll go get coffee. Okay. Yeah, credit card. It's just down the street. So good. Okay. I noticed some good conversations during lunch. What I thought we'd do now before we break out into the groups is kind of capture what the issues are of why you're here, and any questions that we need to be asking that we haven't asked yet, and then see how that breaks out into the two groups that we set. Anna is going to be facilitating and co-facilitating the sort of land stewardship, water, emergency planning group. John's going to be with the economic and community development group. Susan's going to kind of be with whoever she chooses to help scribe and take notes. I'm not sure which. So, and we'll have to kind of divvy up how the groups are so that they do overlap, but, you know, so that you can be in the group that's strongest to your heart. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone around, and let's try to capture, Anna, if you want to try to get and capture what are the issues of people, and I'll try to write it.
Okay, I will start at the back of the room just to mess with everybody. Anybody back here want to comment? Question? Oh, okay. I'll go to the second back of the room.
If there's any issues that we missed,
I'll start with somebody who's not
in
here.
how we're writing out groups, just don't want to miss your input while you're here. If there's something that you're thinking, well, it's not on the agenda, and I haven't heard anybody say anything, let me know what that is. So that we can at least capture it. We might be able to do it all, but we can capture it.
The key thing is we want today to end with a clear idea of the things we need to be thinking about. So please share, you know, what's on your mind and what you'd like to hear us discuss and talk about.